The music was playing. The guests were seated. The flowers were perfect. Everything at my wedding looked exactly the way my fiancée Emma, and I had planned it for over a year. Your one click can keep these stories alive. Subscribe, because every voice deserves to be heard. Don't miss out on the journey. Subscribe and let's grow, laugh, and learn together. Except for one thing. My family wasn't there. At first, I thought they were just running late. My father had a habit of arriving dramatically to important events. My mother was always 5 minutes away, and my younger sister never showed up anywhere on time. So when the ceremony time arrived and their seats were still empty, I tried not to panic. "They'll be here," Emma whispered, squeezing my hand. I nodded, but 20 minutes passed, then 30. Guests began whispering quietly. Emma's parents looked confused. My friends kept glancing toward the entrance of the outdoor venue where the ceremony was supposed to begin. Still no sign of my family. Finally, I stepped aside and pulled out my phone. I called my father, straight to voicemail. I tried my mother. No answer. Then my sister. The call went unanswered again. A strange feeling started forming in my stomach. Emma walked over to me. "Did they pick up?" she asked softly. I shook my head. She tried to smile. "Maybe traffic." But we both knew that didn't make sense. My parents' house was only 15 minutes away from the venue. At that point, most of the guests had noticed something was wrong. The officiant came over quietly. "Do you want to wait a little longer?" he asked. I looked at the empty front row, where my parents should have been sitting. My father was supposed to walk me halfway down the aisle as a symbolic gesture. It had been his idea, and now his chair was empty. 45 minutes passed. Emma's father finally approached me gently. "Son," he said kindly, "we can start the ceremony whenever you're ready." I nodded slowly, but inside I felt embarrassed, confused, and honestly hurt. My own family had missed the most important day of my life. Emma squeezed my hand again. "We're getting married today," she said softly. "That's what matters." She was right. So we decided to start. The music began again. The guests stood up. Emma walked down the aisle with her father, looking absolutely beautiful. And the ceremony continued. For a moment, everything felt normal again. We stood together at the altar while the ceremony started. The officiant spoke about love, commitment, and new beginnings. I tried to focus on Emma's smile instead of the empty chairs behind the guests. Then we reached the moment for our vows. Emma had just finished hers when something unexpected happened. A loud noise echoed from the entrance of the venue. Car doors slamming, people turning their heads. The music suddenly stopped. I looked toward the gate, and that's when I saw them. 3 police cars pulling into the parking area. Guests began whispering nervously. Then the doors opened. Several officers stepped out, and behind them was my father. He was pointing directly toward me as he spoke to one of the officers. My heart dropped because the officer nodded and started walking toward the altar. The entire venue fell silent. The officer walked down the aisle while guests moved their chairs aside to make space. Emma squeezed my hand tightly. "What's happening?" she whispered. I had no idea. My father followed a few steps behind the officer, his face red and tense like he had just won an argument. My mother and sister were standing near the entrance, watching nervously. The officer finally reached the altar. "Sir," he said calmly, looking at me, "we need to ask you a few questions." A wave of whispers spread across the guests. My chest tightened. "About what?" I asked. Before the officer could answer, my father spoke loudly from behind him. He stole from the family business. He said. The words echoed through the venue. Emma turned toward him in shock. "What are you talking about?" she asked. My father ignored her. For years, he continued, pointing at me, he's been secretly taking money from my company. The officer glanced between us. We received a report of possible financial fraud. He explained. My stomach dropped. Fraud? That didn't make any sense. I never stole anything. I said firmly. My father scoffed. Oh, really? Then explain the missing funds. Guests began whispering louder. Emma's father stepped forward protectively. This is a wedding, he said sharply. If you have accusations, handle them later. But my father shook his head. No, he thinks he can embarrass this family and walk away. The officer raised a hand. Let's keep this calm. Then he looked back at me. Sir, your father claims several large transfers were made from his company accounts to yours. I stared at him. Transfers? Then something suddenly clicked in my mind. 2 months ago, my father had signed documents transferring a large sum to me, but it hadn't been theft. It had been a settlement. After I left the family company years ago, we had gone through a legal dispute about shares I helped build when the business was still small. Eventually, my father agreed to buy out my share, but he never wanted anyone to know that, especially not my brother. I looked at my father. You're calling the police over the settlement? I asked quietly. His jaw tightened. It wasn't supposed to be public. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't about money. It was about humiliation. He didn't want people to know he had paid me millions for the part of the company I helped create. Emma looked between us in disbelief. You mean he already paid you? She asked. I nodded slowly, but my father quickly interrupted. He manipulated the situation. He insisted to the officer. That money should never have gone to him. The officer frowned slightly. Sir, do you have documentation showing the transfer was unauthorized? My father hesitated for a second, and that was the moment I realized something important. He hadn't expected the police to actually ask for proof. The officer waited patiently. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he muttered, the paperwork was signed. The officer nodded slowly. So the transfer was legal. A quiet murmur spread through the guests. Emma's father crossed his arms, unimpressed. The officer turned back to me. Sir, it appears this is a civil family matter, not a criminal one. Then he looked at my father. We're leaving. The officers walked away. My father stood there, embarrassed, while every guest watched. I took Emma's hand again and smiled. Now, I said softly, where were we? For a moment after the officers left, no one moved. My father stood near the entrance, clearly realizing that his plan had completely backfired. The whispers from the guests were louder now, and every pair of eyes in the venue seemed to be watching him. Emma gently squeezed my hand. Let's finish this, she said softly. I nodded. The officiant cleared his throat and stepped forward again. Well, that was unexpected, he said with an awkward smile, making a few guests laugh quietly. The tension in the air slowly faded. Emma and I returned our attention to each other, and the ceremony continued. When it was my turn to speak, I looked into her eyes and said the vows we had written together months ago. My voice was steady now, because at that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the whispers, not the drama, not even my father standing in the distance, watching silently. Emma finished her vows with tears in her eyes. The officiant smiled warmly. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. The guests erupted into applause. I kissed Emma, and for the first time that day, I felt completely calm. As we walked back down the aisle together, I noticed something interesting. My father wasn't clapping. He was just standing there, realizing that despite everything he tried to do, the wedding had happened anyway.